folks, welcome back to Indaba Africa. This is Chris once again. Hello folks, and welcome back to Chris Wide Africa here on the Indaba Africa channel, part of the Indaba Broadcasting Network. And thanks to all the viewers who tuned in yesterday to our sister channel, Rugby Ascent, which had a record viewership yesterday for the disappointing loss to England. And we covered all those other games, the amazing victory of the French over the All Blacks. Kind of excited about that one. But we had amazing turnout yesterday. Thanks for that. For those who joined us over there, record-setting day on our sister channel, Rugby Ascendant. But we're back here on Chris Wide Africa, and today we have a special featured guest to talk about electricity and energy power generation in Africa, a subject near and dear to my heart, something I've been studying for decades. But then I don't have degrees and experience in the field like this gentleman does. My guest today is Ted Blom. He's a senior mining and energy legal strategist and tactician with a master's degree in business from Wits Business School, commercial law degrees from the University of Port Elizabeth, and a PhD from Harvard Business School. He's also completed his mineral economics certification from Imperial College of Mining in London. I'm assuming that that's similar to our Colorado School of Mines, which is world-renowned for their stuff. And with that, folks, let me welcome Ted Blom on. He's got his mic on mute, so we'll get him to take his mic off mute there, and then we'll be ready to go. Mr. Blom, how are you today?
Hi, good evening. I'm very well, thanks. And yourself?
I'm well. A little tired, but it's been a long night, but I did get a little bit of rest, so I'm good to go. So, you know, when I wrote to you, I said I'd like to talk about a number of things, and you said we can talk about those things. Like, for instance, one of the things a lot of people around the world don't really understand is that across Africa, at least 640 million people have no electricity. Not generators, not sporadic, not occasional. They have no access to electric grid whatsoever. It's quite a shocking thing when people actually take a moment and think about that. That's nearly twice the size, or it is twice the size of the United States. That many people across the continent of Africa without any access to electricity. And of course, living in 8 different countries across the continent and working in 40 of them, I've seen this up close and personal. Is this something that most people, or anybody even in Africa, is aware of? Well, the people that don't have electricity and those in South Africa with load shedding right now, stage 97 or whatever it's at, would definitely know that story. But from your perspective, is this something that's common knowledge amongst people, or is it just only those who go without electricity know about it?
Okay, so sorry, the lines seems to be very intermittent, so I've missed a little bit of what you've asked me. But look, electricity in the whole of Africa is a problem. I mean, there are hundreds of millions of people. I think the last estimate's about 600 million people without any access to electricity. In the southern part of Africa, we've been rather spoiled in that we've had Eskom around for the best part of 98 years. So we've had access to electricity by and large. Not all the townships and not all the farms. I grew up, for instance, on a farm where even today they don't have electricity. They work off their own power because it's a very remote area and it's not cost effective for electricity to be reticulated to those areas. So yes, but by and large, we've been spoiled in the southern part of Africa. So that's South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Namibia, Botswana, and Mozambique, with a reasonable constant source of electricity. Although in some of the countries with the revolutions, of course, it has been very sporadic. And I guess that's where we find ourselves now. We've been very well serviced by electricity until the so-called revolutionary ANC has taken over, and we're now biting the bullet as we see that for 20 years they've mismanaged our grid.
Well, you know, I find it interesting because I remember 10, 15 years ago, South Africa started retiring coal-fired power plants, and I'm scratching my head going, wait a second. If the economy begins to grow at all, knowing that mining is such a major consumer of electricity, like the platinum mines use a lot of electricity, for an example. And if people are extended onto the grid who've been off the grid, which is one of the promises the African National Congress made coming to power, and if there's any population growth, why are you taking power plants out of your pool of power and not replacing them? And it had a lot to do with this global climate change, carbon dioxide emissions, sulfur dioxide emissions crowd out there. So instead of replacing them, they, for the most part, just took them out of service. And I'm still shaking my head. South Africa has massive coal reserves. The technology for scrubbing the emissions is far better today than it's ever been. And we can reduce that. We just have to put the investment in. Have I missed something, or do you think that sounds accurate?
Okay, so for many years, we actually had a large surplus electricity supply here. And that's why we attracted the heavy industries like the aluminum industry. And in fact, 3 plants. The old plant was upgraded. There was a new plant put in South Africa and a new plant in Mozambique, in Maputo, which, of course, really consume a lot of power, 4 gigawatts each. on average. And that soaked up the surplus that we had in this part of the country. At the same time, because the surplus was so big, Eskom put 3 power stations into mothballs, as we call it. We put them into long-term storage. I was part and parcel of 2 of those exercises, having been moved on from Eskom to one of the coal suppliers at that time. And 2 of those were our mining houses customers. But those were taken out of reserve storage from about 2001. The instruction came for them to be taken out of mothballs and resuscitated. Unfortunately, what had happened then is in 2001, Chris, I think that is a major year that I think we need to just spend 10 seconds on. In 2001, Eskom was converted from a operation, and the shares which were previously the organization didn't have, it was guaranteed by statute. They issued shares, and those shares went to the South African government, which is under the control of the ANC. So the whole
terrible connection. Sorry, folks. This is very frustrating. It's been going on.
Reliable and high availability.
Yeah, Ted, most of what you just told us, in 2001, you said there was a key event. Your camera's off now. If you can just leave it off. Oh, there it is. Okay. But we lost a lot of what you said. It just broke up. You were saying 2001, Eskom was turned from something to something else. I don't think you can hear me. It's frustrating. Maybe if you...
Okay, from a not to a for-profit organization.
Okay, so from a state... So you're saying... Okay. There you go. Just leave the camera off. It might just be easier. So you're saying that it went from being a public utility to a for-profit venture? Sorry.
Absolutely. So it was a non-profit entity.
Okay. And it went to a profit model. Do you think that was a problem?
By the state.
Yeah. Do you think that was a problem, that change? It sounds like you think that was an issue.
Oh, absolutely. Because from having a non-profit motivation and keeping the cost as cheap as possible, it was now mandated to charge and gorge the pockets of its consumers as much as possible. And that's what's happened, as we've had more than 700% above inflation price increases over the last 12 years.
But unlike a publicly held company in which they're shareholders to get dividends and returns from that or make money off the increase in the stock value, that money's not going to people like that. So where's it going?
So initially, in the first few years, there were dividends declared, and those went to the ANC government and were used to distribute into other divisions of the government. For instance, free housing, etc. And I mean, we can talk about free housing as well as a misnomer, because it's probably the most to a free house.
Yeah, we're having a really tough time with this connection, Ted. I don't know. We'll keep trying to go, but hopefully it'll improve. Are you on a mobile network or are you on an ISP?
No, I'm on a broadband wireless network, and I'm not sure why it's playing up today. Normally, I don't have these sort of problems. If it does persist, can I maybe try and redial in, and I'll try and do it from my mobile phone, which seems to have a better connection.
Yeah, why don't you just do that right now, and I'll keep the audience informed while you do that. Go ahead and drop off and try it that way, okay?
Thank you.
All right, excellent. So, folks, that's Ted Blom. We're talking about energy. Now, obviously, those of you know me, you can see that Ted and I already have a very different view of something here. I don't view the privatization, which is not what happened. That's a distinction there. So he said for-profit model, but to me, that's not for profit. That's to the profit of the government. So whether it was considered a nonprofit, if it was a separate entity, but it never was, it was always a parastatal. So that distinction for me is not particularly large, although Ted's there, he's involved in this process. He's very familiar with it, so he's very well informed. For me, actually, privatization, I think, is a very good idea, and that's a step beyond what he's describing there. We lost a lot of what he said. He's trying to come in on his mobile now. Let's see what happens. Hopefully this is better. I don't know how you can hear Ted well, Citizen Guardian, because I couldn't. All right, here we go. His audio is connecting. Okay, and this, why is it with mobile phones? This is really weird. Strange thing. Audio unable to connect. Oh, now it's connected, but no camera. Weird. Weird. Audio is trying to reconnect. Okay, so I hope everybody's well. Oh, I can hear something.
Okay, I'm here.
Yeah, can you try your camera and see if it works on the mobile?
Okay, let's see.
We'll see. If it doesn't, we can just take it off. Okay, there you go. Oh, you're much more handsome now. Yeah. Okay. So while you're away, I was saying that I suspect that, and this is fine. If this is, sometimes people think that when you have a guest on, the guest has to agree with your views. Obviously not. But as I heard you explain it, you said the model changed from a not-for-profit model to a for-profit model. But let me make the distinction. You're not talking about a parastatal being spun off as a privatized entity. It still remained under state control, and that's the key. Because I don't have issues with privatization, and I don't have, from a personal standpoint, as a capitalist, I don't have a problem with a for-profit model because I think it brings the consumer much more. But in this case, it still was a parastatal for-profit, which the African National Congress had control over. Correct?
Absolutely, you got 100% right.
Okay.
And the problem was that they then infiltrated the organization with cadre deployment. In other words, they dropped the issue of meritocracy in appointing people, and you then were flooded by a bunch of people who had other sort of motives rather than running the operation efficiently. So that's more or less where the wheels came off, where they were underestimated demand. They were late in building or approving the new build, and then when the new build did eventually eventuate, the new build suddenly had to have affirmative action business partners, and the ANC then became the business partner of Eskom's new power station developments.
One has to start to have a conspiracy theory and wonder if it's not his connection and it's more maybe the poo tube not liking to have the story told. But his camera's dropped off. There he is back again. So that's strange. Oh, my goodness. Yeah. We started out really well, and then the data just disappeared. Wow. Very frustrating. Well, the camera's off, and I don't think they can hear me now. We certainly can't hear him, although it's sporadic. A little piece breaks through here and there. Wow. Very frustrating. Huh. All right. So, Ted, his mic is turned off now. If you can hear me, maybe you try to disconnect and come back in one more time. What I'm going to suggest is if we can't improve this, that we try this on a different day. I know that both of us have worked really hard to get this done for today, and our audience has been waiting. But if we can't get the connection, we can't get the connection. That's beyond either of our control. So we'll sort something out there. But anyway, okay, I can hear a little bit in the background now. Ted?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, this is incredible. I happen to wonder if your mobile provider and your ISP or YouTube aren't hearing the topic and is censoring it.
I've had that before as well. So
yeah. So Anne-Marie is asking me, could I restart the stream? Anne-Marie, no, it doesn't work like that. There's not a problem here. I have a gigabyte. I download data at 986 megabytes per second. I upload at 45 megabytes. That's a blazing fast. That's not the issue here. The connection on his end is the challenge, and that's the problem here. So, Ted, are you still with me?
I'm with you.
All right, we want to try to continue with just the audio, and we'll see how it goes. And if we keep running into problems, then I'm going to suggest we just try it on a different date. But let's try to continue if you're okay with just the audio. Okay there?
Okay, let's try.
All right. Okay. So let's move away from South Africa a second. We'll come back to that because that's what people want to talk about. But, you and I briefly discussed some of these projects across the continent. Of course, the Portuguese built this massive hydroelectric facility in Mozambique, Cahora Bassa, which provided a lot of electricity, took care of Zimbabwe, and I think also a bit of it went to Malawi and of course, Mozambique as well. The Angolans, I think, had a big hydroelectric project on the Kunene River there, if I'm not mistaken. And then, of course, in Lesotho, you've got the Highlands Water project, which has been a multi-year, multi-phase development for water and also for hydropower generation. These things over the years, I imagine, made a significant contribution to the Southern African power pool. But the Cahora Bassa Dam is getting kind of long of the teeth, as is the Kariaba Dam in Zimbabwe and Kunene. Are those hydro projects something that are okay, are going to be with us for a long time, or do they require revitalization?
Okay, so the Kariaba Dam wall had problems, and that had to be reinforced, and that was actually an amazing engineering feat. We've had a little bit of a dry spell in this part of the world for the last 5 years. So the Zambian hydro systems, which mainly feeds their economy, were running very, very low, and they had a massive deficit and were importing power from us. And the same for the Namibian Kunene River hydro scheme. With the advent of additional mining activity in Namibia, and possibly some smelting by the Chinese, they're also running into power deficits. And in Botswana, they've also had a failure in that they were going to put up a power station. The Chinese put it up. Unfortunately, the technology was incorrect for the grade of coal, and that was deferred or delayed by about 5 years while they had to get the Germans in to re-engineer the boilers to try and get their system up and running. So by and large, there's been a power deficit for the last 12 years in this part of the world.
Well, it's, you mentioned Botswana. We'll get back to that in a moment because let me talk for a second. But at one point, South Africa produced, I think it was 42% of all electricity consumed in sub-Saharan Africa, a phenomenal statistic if that's accurate, and I believe it is accurate. And now seeing over the past number of years a deficit. When I first moved to Botswana in 2008, I had to spend $50,000 buying commercial generators for residences for my staff and for myself because of load shedding, because Eskom was already cutting off the power supply. At that time, Botswana was only producing 25% of its consumption in the country, and they had a plan to do a tender. They sat on it for years. But when I had been there in 2000, I told officials in Botswana, listen, when South Africa's economy takes off and more people get on the grid that have been on the grid for decades, you really need to start building power capacity. You've got coal bed methane deposits, you've got coal deposits, you got all the energy you need here. You really need. Plus, you got solar if you want to play around with that. And they didn't do much of anything. They finally, as you alluded to, awarded this tender to a Chinese company that was supposed to build 3 different turbines, if I'm not mistaken. And only one of those is up. And I think even today it's only at like 35% of capacity. Does that sound right for Botswana?
Yeah, they've had major problems, and there's also been a change of government in Botswana in that Mr. Kama is no longer in power, and his successor has also had a major change of direction in as far as the geopolitics of this part of the world is concerned.
Well, yeah, that's for sure. The difference between Ian Kama and Eric Masisi is night and day. And I think my viewers know my personal preference, having worked with Kama. And despite the fairy tales that people tell about him, he's not the character they make him out to do. Although they're trying to get an arrest warrant for him now, this little tiff that's going on. Botswana, an interesting case. But as we're talking about here, South Africa was a net exporter of power to the Southern African power pool for many, many years. And I should think that you would imagine that political officials in South Africa, since it's a parastatal, Eskom, would be embarrassed that not only are you no longer an exporter that your neighboring countries can't rely on for reliable supply, but you have a net deficit. I mean, I saw that as much as 42% of installed capacity was offline a couple weeks ago in South Africa. That's insane. Absolutely insane.
Yeah, 43% was off last week. So there's also an issue about what the installed capacity is, because what's happened seemingly over the last 2 or 3 years is that capacity has been taken offline, but it hasn't been deregistered off the system with the energy regulator, because that allows them to claim a return on those defective parts or plants, and which is illegal, of course. And the regulator, there's been a change of chair in the regulator as well. And the new incumbent, I don't think is quite in the saddle as he should be as yet. So, yes, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on at Eskom. And at any one time, it's very difficult to ascertain what the actual state of readiness is. I had insight into what was going on, certainly on the 2nd of June. I received very much up-to-date information on that day, when Eskom declared level 2 load shedding, and I was given data which proved that we were actually at level 6 load shedding. So there's a lot of misrepresentation and lies from the Eskom executive, but it makes it very difficult for you and me, or for the people around this part of the world who are business owners, because you can't afford to bring workers in on shifts where they just sit around and they don't produce anything. And you also need to have an idea, a line of sight, as to what that forecast for power is in the days ahead. so that you can take emergency measures or some type of cost curtailment measures. And Eskom hasn't been playing the game. Now, as at last week, again, I had some sort of insight into what the state of the system was. And let me tell you, the 40%, 43% of it was off, not available, broken. And of the 57% that was available, less than 20% was actually running to spec. The balance of it was limping along. And the only synonymous or the example I can give you, it's like a car with a half flat wheel. And you never know when the thing's going to just pop. That was the state of our electricity generation in the course of the last 2 weeks.
And, it's, Ted, you know this quite well, but I mean, for the audience out there, it's not simply a question of the power's on, the power's off. It's also the surges in the lines, the damage, the shortening lifespan of electronic equipment, computers, towers, switches, servers, mechanical things that require power. You shorten the lifespan of those things. Sometimes they're blown out and damaged by power surges and power drops. That plays an impact. It's the storage of pharmaceuticals, of vaccinations, of food, transport. And it just goes on and on and on, the knock-on effect of this. I mean, South Africa already has a whole variety of problems which make it unattractive from a foreign direct investor standpoint. And I don't say this out of spite or malice because I love South Africa, but if one's honest about South Africa, it has a very uneven level of efficiency or efficacy in the workforce. You get abysmal productivity in parts of the workforce. You get world-class in other parts. It's very uneven. You have to pay a fortune for private security because law enforcement doesn't provide security, and you need it. And then you also have this issue, you have to provide your own power. And the list goes on and on. This is even before we get to expropriation without compensation of property. That's a whole other thing that's on the table. When I was in Liberia, and I was responsible for rebuilding the armed force of Liberia, I had to run at risk with the contractors because we weren't getting funds to pay them. I had to rob Peter to pay Paul to continue paying the contractors because if we didn't pay the contractors, they were the ones running the generators, providing electricity and lights for our military installations. And I explained to people, if they leave, the generators go, and when the generators go, everything on the installation will be stolen within 3 hours. And people looked at me like I was crazy. Well, we had a power outage at one of our facilities, and the guards couldn't see anybody, and they looted the place in a matter of an hour. And so the list of all the challenges here, we haven't even got into. They're all worried about carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide. Fair enough. Those are definitely not ideal things. But what about the lung damage and the emphysema and all the other things from people burning charcoal, the deforestation because they have to cook their food with charcoal, they have to heat with charcoal, children that have damaged eyesight because they can't see properly, working by candlelight. The list just goes on and on. It's really a mess, and I think a lot of people just see, oh, my power went out. It's a lot more complicated than that. The damage is far more widespread. Would you agree, Ted?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, you've just alluded right at the end. I thought you were going to miss it. Is the amount of devastation that takes place while the power is off. South Africa's got an unemployment rate amongst the under 35s or under 40s of over 70%. 70% of the people under the age of 40 have most of them have never had a job. Or they're unemployed. And the fact of the matter is, the moment the power is off, every piece of metal becomes very attractive from a pillaging point of view. And when the power comes back on, half of your infrastructure is gone. I mean, we're now seeing railway lines. When I was in northern Mozambique opening up the Tet coalfield around about 1990, one of the questions I asked the locals, I said, well, what happened to the railway line? And they laughed at me and they said, no, somebody stole the railway line. I said, no, man, that's not possible. These things weigh thousands of kilograms and they're 100 meters to 150 meters long. How can they be stolen through the bush? Well, I've seen that with my own very eyes happening in the middle of eastern part of Johannesburg over the last two or 3 years. We've got stations here, railway stations that are derelict. The railway lines or rails have been stolen. They're gone. Never mind the overhead conductor for the powering of the rail. Bridges. I mean, I went to the Mpumalanga province, the eastern province, the old Eastern Transvaal, and I couldn't believe the state of the roads. From the coal trucks that are now being used to transport coal as opposed to rail, and also the state of the infrastructure, where everything that looks like a piece of metal has been ripped apart and taken away.
Yeah, Ted, I saw this phenomenon myself when I first started doing my tours in the Army in Africa, in many parts of Africa where infrastructure had been put in the 60s by USAID or by DFID from the UK or international donors. They would put in sewage systems with those heavy steel grates that go over it on the street. And, years later, after all those people are gone, no maintenance of the installed infrastructure. And then eventually you got to be careful because you'll just break an axle because you drive right into one of these sewage lines because they steal the manhole covers. Unbelievable. It's just crazy stuff. And it's a real problem. The African National Congress, not to get into a political conversation, but they really have screwed the pooch here on security in the country and the politicization of the South African Police Service, the ineffectiveness, the corruption, all the things. That's not to denigrate the 187,000 people serving for SAPS, but SAPS is not providing security to South Africans, and the criminals know it. And they're taking advantage of it. Just look at July in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng provinces, and an eternal insurrection within the ruling party led to the chaos that took place there. No, but it's absolutely crazy. And the thing that gets me, Ted, is how damaging is this? People who tap into these high tension lines to steal electricity, that has to have a damaging effect on the grid.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's totally unsafe from the first point of view, and people always cry when somebody gets killed. And then secondly, I mean, it just degrades the quality of the power. I mean, what most people don't understand is that there are quite a few attributes to power supply. Besides having a steady cycle, hertz, you need to have, you mustn't have voltage dips. And then on some electronic equipment, there's something called harmonics. And when you have all the illegal connections and interruptions, you disrupt the harmonics. So if you're casting something that's very sensitive, like an engine block, for instance, and the harmonics aren't correct, you are actually casting a defective engine block, which has inherent defects because the molecules haven't deposited the way they should have under normal electricity supply. So yes, I mean there's a whole lot of invisible impacts as well. So it's a catastrophic situation, especially if you've been used to 100 years of good power.
Folks, you're listening to Chris White Africa on the Indaba Africa channel here on the Indaba Broadcasting Network. It's Sunday, November 21st, and I'm crying in my beer after the Springboks loss yesterday. But on to more interesting topics today. My guest today is Ted Blom. He's an engineer who has done quite a bit of work in the energy sector and knows a great deal about electricity. I dare say we call him electricity expert, certainly an analyst on that. And we're talking about a number of issues here. Ted, let me ask this question about this, what I think is, I guess I'll show my hand before I put the question out there. What I thought was a foolhardy decision, and it seemed like just another way to spread patronage around by creating multiple entities and having boards and directors and positions for the ANC to deploy their cadres. And that's this decision to divide Eskom a few years ago into power generation, into distribution. And I'm thinking, that doesn't make any sense. You're making three entities that are dependent on each other, competing with each other, and they all need each other in order to make it happen. Why don't you, if you're going to do that, break Eskom down into regional viable entities where they have enough power plants and resources and a grid so that they can be successful potentially here and one here and make it regional? That seemed to be a lot brighter decision. Is that plan still in place, or did I misrepresent the plan that the ANC had to divide it into these different entities?
Okay, I need to, as a matter of urgency, just correct you. I'm not an engineer.
My apologies for that. I misspoke.
Okay. So I've been involved with energy, and I understand some of the engineering concepts reasonably well, I believe. Nevertheless, let's get back to the unbundling exercise.
Yes.
I was very vocal about that, in that at Eskom, where I worked in the late 80s for the first time, and I've been there 3 times in my lifetime. In the late 80s, we were very proud of having a very clear and well-defined chart of accounts. Now, what does a chart of accounts mean? That means that for every cost center, you've got a different code, so that when you want to decompile your results and recompile them as per division or department or whatever area, geographic area, you use the codes and you can quickly work out whether that division or part or department is cost effective or not, and whether they're meeting their targets or not. So Eskom had a very good chart of accounts. In fact, in those days, we had our year-end results out without, and we're talking about pre-Windows 95 days now, hey? When computers still had to be cranked by hand. We had our results out within 4 weeks of year-end. And of course, there was lots of developments over the last 30 years. There's no reason for Eskom to need to unbundle in order to make it more manageable. For anybody who's half competent and has the proper chart of accounts, and I know they messed with the chart of accounts at the peak of the corruption about 10 years ago, but if you recompile those chart of accounts as the way they should be and were, there is no reason for anybody to want to break up Eskom. And as you say, the parts are so interdependent that you fool yourself to think that by isolating them, you can manage them independently. Only a fool would think that way. And unfortunately, it was a political decision. And I think part and parcel of the political decision is to sink the generation division and to create space for new players in the renewable area to take over the grid and to hijack the grid, so to speak, and to make it their own.
Well, yeah, I think that's part of it. I also think the purpose is the place to stuff cadre, loyal cadre, to reward them, because the ruling party, in my view, exists for 500,000 people associated with the party, not for the other 59 million South Africans and residents who are there. But I got to address something very quickly here. You know, we're talking about people tapping illegally into the power grid and stealing electricity and the danger that it is. I call those freeloaders. Speaking of freeloading, we've got 47 likes on this stream for Ted's time, and we got twice as many viewers. You know, folks, there's no cost to listen to this program and to hear what Ted has to say, to share with us his experience there. Stop freeloading and push the like button. Anyway, but yeah, no, it's the bundling thing is, I'm still shaking my head about that. The only excuse I can find is that it's a way for them to reward people. We've seen this in South African Airways. We've seen it in Transnet. We've seen it across the board. About the only place we really haven't seen much of it is the airports company in South Africa, but that's a small entity and probably not a lot of space to stuff people in there. But this whole situation of late, I mean, South Africans are really hot full of everything that's going on right now. It's crazy. This load shedding that's come back just before the election. Now we have senior members of the ANC claim there's sabotage by former employees. And then we're hearing sabotage within the company. Then De Ruyter comes out a couple days ago and says, in fact, that one of the pylons was cut and there's no evidence of wear or corrosion. It's clear sabotage. So this is quite a strange situation. I don't think the last time we saw sabotage at Eskom was Mkhonto Wesizwe was running around the country in the early 1990s.
Okay, so there was a major allegation of sabotage in November 2019, when the president, in fact, came onto the TV screens together with Eskom management at that time, and they made vicious allegations of sabotage. They had the then head of generation on, and this is the problem. You know, they rotate staff at senior level who aren't competent, and the stats that were given didn't comply with the stats of the operation that had been sabotaged. In other words, they got the sizes of the boilers wrong. Now, you don't have to be too clever to understand that every different power station is a different generation station, and the boilers are also different. But it's unforgivable for the general manager for operations not to know the operating stats of the power station where he alleges he's now put a lot of focus on because of critical sabotage. Well, we've had our hawks and the investigating teams into that, and the report came out. And in fact, the special investigation unit said there was no trace of any sabotage. So yes, whenever we had a similar exercise in 1995 under Minister Alec Irwin, when the so-called bolt fell into the nuclear power station in Cape Town, which again the ANC cried sabotage, and it was eventually, after a massive investigation, found that it wasn't sabotage. So for De Ruyter to call sabotage, I would believe it if it was after a proper investigation, but I wouldn't take his word for it. Notwithstanding showing us 3 or 4 photographs where seemingly some wires or pylons have been severed, I would wait for the full investigation. And the situation is so bad in terms of ethics and trust that I couldn't put it past Eskom that they didn't sabotage themselves to try and get public sympathy. The public is so hurtful, as you said, of Eskom and its fraud and corruption and mismanagement that they don't want to listen to anything that Eskom's got to say. And I wouldn't put it past the management of Eskom to actually self-inflict. And this government and other governments around the world are known to have done those type of practices.
Well, that's quite a shocking thing if, in fact, that were to be the case. But is there any way out of this morass that we're in? I mean, my approach is too long term at this stage, and it's something that I suggested 2 decades ago should be done, and that's privatize it. With a proper independent regulator to make sure that there's no subterfuge going on, and that there's power sharing and grid sharing and that sort of thing. But that would have been my approach to it. I mean, right now, so many people are just going off grid. They're building their own capacity, which drives up their cost, and it's not the most efficient. Now you have this exception for independent power providers to put excess power back into the grid. Amazon just built this 10 megawatt solar photovoltaic plant in the Karoo or in the Northern Cape, and that's how they're going to power their data center, they claim, in Cape Town. Is there a way out of this morass? I mean, this sounds like an incredibly complicated disaster that we find ourselves in South Africa.
Okay, so I don't think that under the current regime, Eskom will be able to recover. I think it's been pillaged and mismanaged so badly that it would take a miracle to fix Eskom up and get it anywhere near its glory of 20 years ago. I can't believe, in fact, brings tears to my eyes to think that in 20 years, the organization could have been crippled so badly. So I think the way forward is for every person who is dependent on power to do his own thing. And certainly I don't see renewable energy currently without storage as being anything of a viable option. But the ground needs to be opened up for people who are critically dependent on energy to actually do their own thing and create their own generation capacity. For households, it's probably viable for them to go solar with a small battery pack for their critical functions. But we need to get more energy into our economy. We need to deregulate a lot of things that have been regulated by the ANC. And if we don't reduce the unemployment numbers like drastically, this place is going to become like the Wild West as far as criminal activity is concerned. People can only hold out for so long, and eventually they just buckle and they just fall into the easy or the easier option of just grabbing and stealing and taking whatever they want.
The Wild West. You mean KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng in July?
I would say that's probably a Sunday picnic of what could happen in South Africa if this government doesn't get its act together very, very soon. And we're talking about weeks and months rather than years to the next election. A lot of people are in very, very dire circumstances here, and a lot of people are very, very frustrated. And I don't know if it will be a race war. I think we passed that part of the equation. I think it will be man on man between the ruling party and the people that have been deprived and stolen of their future by the government.
Well, I mean, not to get too far into this topic, but it's certainly empathy for people. But at some point, you have to question your empathy when just 20%, 31% of the eligible voters bother to go voting, and so few people turn up. A ridiculously low figure. The African National Congress in municipal elections this year, not that the national figure matters because it's in wards and municipalities where the votes count. That's where you get seats, and the ANC lost a lot of seats, over 600, close to 700 seats, or 621, excuse me. They lost a lot of seats, but the real issue here is that only 13% of those eligible to vote in the country actually voted for the ANC. The Democratic Alliance is running around crowing about, whoa, they've been brought below 50%. Not a germane figure. It doesn't affect the municipalities at the national level. It's local. But if you're going to focus on that level at the national aggregate, they only actually got 13% of the vote. And then no one else even came close to that. That's a really sad and apathetic approach. Either people are tuned off and don't think elections matter, or they just don't care and they're resigned to their fate. It's whatever the case is. It's very depressing, and it's hard to be upbeat and support South Africans when so few people make even the mildest effort to contribute to the polity and the public debate.
No, absolutely. I mean, that is psychology that I would struggle to understand. And you've seen it on TV, both in this election and the previous election. People saying, "Well, I'm a diehard ANC supporter, and to spite them and to raise my disappointment, I'm just not going to go and vote." They don't seem to be able to transcend the bridge to say, well, you know what I should be doing is voting for somebody else who actually can do something about it, and somebody who would be a new face and maybe be more motivated to actually deliver something. That type of mentality really is very, very difficult to understand, but it seems to be part and parcel of the makeup of this part of the world.
No, absolutely. And it's not just the ruling party that took a major hit. The ANC lost 32% of the votes it collected in 2016 in municipal elections. But the Democratic Alliance, the main opposition party, lost 37% of the votes that they collected in 2016, dropping from 4,004,000 back to 2.5 million. So both those parties, people are disillusioned with them, obviously, and just aren't going to the polls. It's pretty crazy stuff. But hey, let's shift focus a little bit there, Ted. And let me ask you this question. South Africa does, of course, have one nuclear power generation facility. That's Koeberg, which is located north of Cape Town on the west coast of South Africa. You mentioned it a little while ago, this famous dropped wrench issue. There was another dropped wrench issue when the Type 209 diesel submarines were being delivered to South Africa. The Mendy, the supply ship, a service ship, had to turn around. It was escorting one of the submarines. It had to turn around and go back to France to pick up a part that only the ship could carry to help do repairs at that facility. But Koeberg, it's been around for a while. Is its service life still good, or is this something that's going to have to be taken out of service sometime in the near future?
Okay, so Koeberg has reached the end of its commercial service life. And in fact, if it isn't refurbished and retrofitted, we'll need to switch off the lights by 2024, if I have my dates correct. There are plans afoot to retrofit new steam generators and refurbish the power station and allegedly make it good for another 20 to 40 years. I'm not sure whether look, Koeberg is a Generation 1 power station, and we now at Generation 4. So lots of technology has changed between the days when Koeberg was built and where we are today. And in fact, there isn't a Generation 4 in operation at the moment. But yes, we've been offered Generation 4 units when Mr. Zuma went out to go and procure nuclear power. I'm not sure that Koeberg is fit for purpose, and I'm going to divulge something now that is probably not common knowledge, and I'm not doing this because I don't want to be patriotic. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm really seriously concerned. I've been in discussions with somebody who did an audit at Eskom in the recent while, and they did an audit on some of the large coal power stations, and they did an audit, a compliance audit on Koeberg. And let's just focus on Koeberg for the moment. As far as Koeberg was concerned, and Koeberg, as a nuclear installation, has more stringent compliance regulations in terms of fitting and removing parts than an aircraft has. And even aircraft maintenance and compliance is very, very important. Otherwise, these things fall out of the sky. And I'm told, and I have every reason to believe this, that the compliance documentation for refurbishment and maintenance at Koeberg is 6 years behind.
Wow.
You can't run an installation like that. And in other words, if you go and replace a part that's now squirting out steam or whatever it may be doing, and you look at the manual, the chances are what you're finding in the manual and what you're finding in the plant being the same is negligible, because the documentation is 6 years. It's over 200,000 documents behind.
Wow, that's insane. That's insane, Ted.
And that's a big concern to me. And I don't think that's part of the public domain. And as I said, I don't want to say that I don't want to raise this issue in an unpatriotic manner. But by the same token, you won't be patriotic if Koeberg blows up because somebody hasn't done their work.
Well, Ted, it's not unpatriotic to tell the truth. I mean, all of our countries have warts and make errors. I mean, on my side of the Atlantic, now the Manchurian cadaver, as I call Joe Biden, his reckless decision to simply, take our toys and walk away from Afghanistan by misleading the public and lying to them about what we're actually doing in Afghanistan. The public's tired of a 20-year war. The war ended over a year and a half prior. We weren't in conflict in Afghanistan. We were training their forces and then also providing an umbrella of security that kept the Taliban from taking action. And he simply withdrew it, and look what happened there. So that's not unpatriotic. I served my country 36 and a half years. You've obviously served the people of South Africa and the interests of South Africans. So it's not unpatriotic to point out the shortcomings that there. Someone has to talk about it. I mean, you can't keep papering this over. I mean, this won't be as if something bad happens, it won't be like, okay, well, the power plant at a fire station, or the power plant had a fire and, the boiler burned up and, the coal reserves burned up. We're talking about a nuclear facility on the west coast of South Africa. So, I mean, this is a place that ought to have, the best management, the best safety, the best regulation, the best attention paid to it. And if it's not happening and they're 6 years behind, that's just shocking.
No, absolutely, and to indicate that it's not just a once-off type of situation. The situation at the coal plants that were audited at the same time was similar. They found that the compliance was less than 50%. In terms of the documentation and what was happening in the plants. And they took the 8 best plants. I know Eskom's got 12 coal plants in Mpumalanga and 2 up in the northwest province. And they took 8 of the best coal plants, and they found that the compliance was less than. In other words, Chris, it explains a lot of things. It explains why the maintenance program isn't working, because you get to the plant, you bring along spares, and the spares aren't as per the manual. The plant has been modified, or they fitted a part, or there's something different. You got the wrong tools, or you got the wrong discipline. You need a builder, and they brought a plumber or whatever, because you can't fix the one thing because it's no longer operating the way that the diagram said it worked. I've got access to documentation of subcontractors who were fired by Eskom for raising the alarm, where boiler pipes, and we're talking about high pressure pipes, had to be bent to make them fit into the joints. They had to be bent. Now, the moment you bend a pipe, you know that you attack the integrity of the pipe.
The tensile strength is reduced.
Absolutely. And I've got evidence of that. And when the person who raised the issue and noticed it, it happens to be a person of color, and he took me to his house. He showed me the documentation. He showed me the photographs. He showed me the emails that he sent to Eskom management. He showed me the emails that he sent to Parliament, and it's all been brushed under the carpet. And then we wonder why there's explosions at the power stations, why the maintenance takes 10 times longer and lasts only for a few days at a time. It's because it's being run like a knock shop. There's no other way to describe it. It's not the way to run a professional institution.
Well, for my international audience, my American audience specifically, Ted said knock shop. Think of a chop shop, same sort of thing. It's an illicit operation where people are just cutting things apart and using parts. Yeah, Ted, a question that kind of falls right in line with that from one of my viewers, Anna Marie Nell, says, do you think that South Africa still has capable minds to step in, or have most of them left South Africa? And I think it raises a good question, because I know personally of many people who are engineers, Ted, and people who are in the field who were chased away as either contractors, subcontractors, or employees at Eskom, who are now employed in France in their energy industry, in the UK, in Japan. They're abroad. Do we still have the intellectual capacity in South Africa to even save this mess, do you think?
Okay, so, without hard numbers, it's very difficult to be specific. I am aware, as you said, there are people in the Philippines, New Zealand, Australia, all over the world who cut their teeth here. And that was part and parcel of the duty of the state-owned enterprises. They were the workshops and the training shops of most of the artisans in this country. And that has unfortunately fallen by the wayside since the African National Congress took over control. In fact, they abolished the technical institutions, even for the mining industry, in 1997. So we're even sitting with mining staff that are not properly trained. We don't have artisans that are properly trained. And those that are there are long in the tooth. They're not going to be working forever. So yes. But we still have a small pool of people. Also remember, we're talking about now 27 years of African National Congress misrule, so to speak. And people don't live forever.
Well, yeah.
And a lot of those people are now pretty old. They were senior then, and they're now pretty old. I don't know how available they would be.
Well, and you talk about misrule, but a few months back, Cyril Ramaphosa was talking about education and reflecting back on the Soweto riots in 1985 over the introduction of Afrikaans, and back in 76, the same thing. And he said that no, Bantu education is worse than no education at all. And I tend to agree with him. The ANC's Bantu education has been a disaster for South Africa, sending children or kids to university who score 30% in 2 math subjects on their matric exam. Can you imagine that? I don't want to be the guy that drives across a bridge built by a structural engineer who went to university and got 35 in math and in 38 in chemistry. That's not the guy I want building the bridges that I drive across. So it's a lot deeper. And then you kind of alluded to that. And it's really frightening and scary what's been going on this past 3 decades in South Africa, while the world has looked the other way and paid no attention to it.
Yeah, that's a major pity, and together with the fact that you can maybe still remedy. My father was a carpenter, so he wasn't maybe the brightest nail in the box either. But because he went through his apprenticeship, my father eventually, when we played darts, he could calculate the scores mentally far faster than anybody that I'd met. Why? Because he was trained, and he was using his training on a daily basis, adding inches and subtracting inches on his ruler as he was building buildings and so forth and so on. So you can remedy some of the weaknesses of education through practical work and training. But if that practical work and training, the colleges have been closed and abandoned, who's going to train these people? Who's going to discipline them? Who's going to measure them and mentor them? It doesn't happen. So you're right. We've got generations now, 3 generations of people who think they've got a good qualification until they put to the test, and then they think it's maybe racial, or they think it's a spite or malice that you attack their efforts. Their efforts are just not good enough, and when it's mentioned to them, they become disheartened. And I can understand that. If I didn't know that what I know is inadequate, I would also feel affronted when somebody tells me that I can't do a proper contribution. I'll feel very heartsore about it. And that's where we are now, is that it's hit the psyche. It's hit the psyche of the nation.
Absolutely. It's atrocious. It is the bigotry and racism of low expectations, and that's what the African National Congress is leashed on all South Africans, especially people of color, people who are black in South Africa. It's really, really disgusting. You don't uplift anybody by lowering standards. You improve quality of education. But of course, when you award fictitious contracts to non-existent broad-based black economic empowerment firms to deliver textbooks in the Eastern Cape, and children don't get textbooks, and all the money disappears, and nobody's prosecuted, gee, it's no wonder when these things happen. Let's shift a little bit here on this one, Ted. So, it's all the rage to talk about carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide emissions from coal-fired power plants, and how evil coal-fired power plants are. And when I see people talk about this, I look at people that live with no electricity, that have to cut down all the trees around them, that have erosion washing away their topsoil, polluting beds where fish spawn so they can't spawn anymore, having disastrous impacts environmentally. And then they're burning this charcoal, and then they're breathing it in small confined spaces, getting lung diseases and illnesses, and hundreds of thousands of Africans die from this lung disease induced by burning charcoal every year. And people who just don't have the ability to heat and treat water because they don't have electricity. And I sit there and shake my head, because China, which committed in 2013 or 2014 to produce 90% of its power generation projects that it funded in Africa for alternative energy. I think that's a misnomer too, but that was so-called green energy. No energy is green. That's a lie. But they try to build a $2 billion coal facility on Lamu Island in Kenya. Kenya has no coal deposits, and it's offshore. So that got scrapped finally, but that was a $2 billion project. Most of what they've done on the continent has actually been hydropower, traditional hydropower, which I would argue is not environmentally sound either, although I'm not opposed to it. But China is building 350 coal-fired power plants every year, producing more pollution from those coal-fired power plants than most countries around the world combined are putting out. And in the meantime, they are castigating countries like South Africa that relies on coal. The U.S., we used to rely on coal. It's down to about just a quarter of our power generation now. But in South Africa's case, you have massive coal deposits, the world's largest coal processing facilities at Richards Bay, and it's designed to export coal abroad, and much of that goes to China these days. Is it not the height of hypocrisy to hear people complain about carbon dioxide emissions in South Africa, which is the 12th largest polluter in the world, by the way, for carbon dioxide. But is it not the height of hypocrisy to hear that when people are hungry, there's no lights, industry is falling apart? Wouldn't it be more important, and this is an op-ed for you to answer if you want to, but wouldn't it be more important to bring reliable, safe, consistent power generation to South Africans in whatever reasonable method we can get it, i.e. coal-fired, until you can come up with something else down the road? Or am I just smoking, doggy here?
No, I think there's a couple of facts that one needs to just investigate before one sort of comes to some sort of emotional conclusion. Firstly, the amount of carbon dioxide South Africa emits is, I think, 300% or 300 times less than what China does.
Oh, there's a major easily. I'm sure probably even less than that. Yeah, good.
Yeah, there's a major disparity between the top 5 carbon emitters and South Africa. Yes, Biden says, yes, we're the largest carbon emitters in Africa. Holy Moses, I'm glad about that because it means we've got some economic activity over here and the rest of Africa hasn't got any economic activity. I expect us to be the largest emitters. And I'm proud of that.
You're spot on. I'm sorry, I'm laughing because it's actually entertaining. You're right. It's being the 12th largest in the world when the top 5 produce like 85% of it really doesn't mean much now, does it?
Exactly. That's the one thing. The other thing is I've done a little bit of research, and maybe I'm wrong. As I told you, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a scientist. I'm on the wrong side of 60, and I'm also pretty stupid, I think. But nevertheless, I come from a very backward part of the country. But nevertheless, the fact of the matter is I read some NASA stats. And NASA, as far as I know, other than this young chap by the name of Musk, are one of the few people who've been up in the sky. And their analysis of the atmosphere indicates that of the greenhouse gases, GHG, 96% is water vapor. 96% of the greenhouse gases is water vapor, and that I assume comes from the oceans. Nobody's talking about putting blankets over the oceans. Of the balance, 0.0001% is carbon dioxide. In other words, 400 parts out of a million is carbon dioxide. And of that, half comes from volcanoes, emissions, and farting animals. So, what are we having a go at here?
Well, it's a good point, Ted. And Light Rain just shared something which I've repeatedly told people about here. All the wrong lessons are learned by these because they're political actors. It's not about science. It's not about service delivery. It's not about improving the quality of life, extending life expectancy by giving people life-saving things and life-improving things like electricity. It's about politics. For instance, when the tsunami hit Japan and the Fukushima power plant was hit and they failed to take the steps that were in place to prevent a meltdown, the Germans learned all the wrong lessons. They said, we have to get rid of our nuclear power plants. Well, none of the German nuclear power plants are built on the Ring of Fire, on a fault line, on a place that's prone to earthquakes where tsunamis can hit. They're all inland, nowhere near the sea, and they're all well situated, and among some of the best nuclear safety standards on the planet for the German plants, and generated about 35% of their power at the time. So the lesson they learned was to get rid of them. Well, what do? They increase the amount of lignite, brown coal, which is incredibly polluting, that they're using. They increase the amount of coal that they're using by taking these nuclear power plants off and telling people that they've added solar photovoltaic and wind turbines. Well, they added those, but not enough to make up the deficit. And they're importing natural gas to fire other plants from Russia. So it's cutting your nose off to spite your face, because to me, it's just virtue saying, oh, look, we saved the environment. We no longer have nuclear power plants. Actually, nuclear power plants, if you use modern 4th generation standards with microreactors, things like that, are far more efficient, far safer, and a much better option than any of this nonsense that people are talking about.
Absolutely. And I'm a real big fan of these small-scale embedded nuclear plants. They're off the shelf, so they can be mass-produced, much cheaper, very much more cost-defined. All they need is a little bit of civil engineering to put the foundation down. They're air-cooled. They don't need water to be cooled. They are low pressure, so they cannot explode. And amongst the better ones, they only need refueling once every 12 years. So they virtually run maintenance-free. I can't think of a better solution if I tried.
Yeah, but the problem is that the environmentalists, the environmental religious zealots, have pretty much shut down nuclear power. Excuse me. 3 Mile Island, which is just 30 kilometers from my house, was generating power until last year. It's now shut down and not been replaced. So we've lost generation capacity on the grid, and that's not been replaced by new generation stuff because they have convinced the world evil, evil, kind of like Rachel Carson and DDT. Evil, evil, evil. Well, actually, DDT in judicious, proper use of it is a highly effective pesticide. Which can save lives, particularly those in malaria-prone regions. But people just, they buy into the religion, they drink the Kool-Aid, no matter what we're talking about. So let's talk about a little more Kool-Aid there, Ted. Okay, so the Karoo, lots of sunshine out there. You got the Namib Desert north of there, Namibia. Boy, you'd think that they'd just be laying out fields and fields and fields of solar photovoltaic panels, putting them out there and adding them to the grid. But we haven't seen that. People keep acting as if solar photovoltaic is the answer. Now, I'll have to be honest here. The efficacy of solar photovoltaic has increased dramatically. It was only about 13 or 14% energy return just a few years ago. Now it's up into the 20s, and some of it, they claim to be approaching the high 20s. But nonetheless, the internal combustion engine still is far more efficient at producing energy from the mass that's used for it than solar photovoltaic. But what about the Karoo and just blanketing the whole Karoo or the Northern Cape with the solar photovoltaic? Would that solve South Africa's energy needs?
Well, Chris, and that has been my cry over the last couple of months, is that the renewable people have bragged about how cheap their power is, but power, unfortunately, only has a value if it's available when it's in demand. Power that's available when there's no demand has no value, and if it's not stored, it just dissipates and doesn't add any value to an economy. So I think that's where this country made, and probably most countries, made the biggest mistake in that they accepted the bona fides of the renewable lobby, who are very strong, and a lot of money seems to be passing under the table from these guys, and they allowed them to tender without storage. They should have made them say, listen, if you want to add on to the grid, you need to be able to add dispatchability, and in other words, or predictability. If you cannot make your power available when it's needed, as opposed to when it's available from natural resources, then you're not allowed. You can do small scale off grid stuff, but we're not allowing you onto the grid. Everybody who wants to connect to the grid needs to be able to have either storage or be dispatchable, one way or the other. And then we would have seen a totally different argument as to what is sustainable and what is not sustainable. Yes, there are large parts of the Karoo, and that's where I, in fact, spent most of my school holidays, on family farms in that part of the world. But again, without storage, it means nothing, because our peak power, and I'm sure that's the same in every country in the world, starts in the early morning before there's any solar power available, and from about 6 o'clock in the morning till about 9 o'clock when people settle down at work, and again in the afternoon from 5 o'clock till about 9 o'clock in the evening when they've settled back at home with supper and homework done, etc., etc. The fact of the matter is that none of the renewables is dispatchable, so you can't predict that it will be available at that time. And secondly, the wind and the solar tend to be, in many instances, to be related. The wind is caused by heating that's caused by the sun. So if you have an overcast couple of days, you also have no wind. And that's what's happened in the northern part of Europe over the last month or so, which has seen energy prices rise by more than 700%. I think that, it's possible that you can use open spaces like the deserts in America and the deserts in this part of the world. It will obviously require much more reticulation investment because those areas are desolate and far away from where the energy is actually needed. And I don't think our current fiscus and utility are anywhere near in a position to do that transition in under 10 years. It's not possible.
No, I think that's a fair statement. Listen, to the 150 plus people who are currently watching the program, you're freeloading, just like the people stealing electricity from the grid, tapping into it. Only 80 of you if you smash that like button. So get busy pushing that button over there. We get some really good information here from Ted Blom, who's sharing this with us about what's going on in energy in Africa and South Africa in particular. Ted, it's but you got to wonder, because there's so much this is politicized. I mean, how seriously can you take this when you have members of parliament for the ruling party who stand up in parliament and say things like, when Jan van Riebeck came here 2,000 years ago, and then the next thing you hear from them, one of their members of parliament saying, if we build all these solar photovoltaic plants, it'll take all the energy from the sun. I mean, these are not only dim bulbs, these are exploded bulbs. There's no cogent intelligence inside those empty-headed vessels who say things like that. Jan van Riebeck did not come to South Africa 2,000 years ago. If he did, then there would have been Europeans in South Africa long before the Bantu arrived, by about 300, 400 years. But anyway, that's just crazy stuff. Well, let me ask this one. To be fair about this, now, solar used to be called solar thermal. They're changed the name now, where you take reflected mirrors and concentrated solar power is what they call it now. And you use that, you use that to heat up molten salt, which stays in storage vats, usually underground. And then they use that heat, releasing it throughout the night for consistent power delivery, so you don't have a surge during the day like you get with solar photovoltaic and then a drop off at night. And they use that to generate steam. Those schemes, we have one in the Mojave in California. There's one now in Morocco. The proponents of that say that it's very effective and reliable and consistent power service. Is that something that people in South Africa take a look at? It is right expensive, and I would not want to be flying over it, looking down at those mirrors and get blinded by them. But any thoughts on concentrated solar power, or as I call it, as a fossil, because I'm a fossil, solar thermal?
Okay, so we do have one of those plants in South Africa. I think it was developed by the Spanish. And that's, in fact, been Eskom saving grace over a number of weeks in the last 6 months. But, of course, you alluded to it. The cost of those is about 4 to 5 times more expensive than, in fact, no. It's about, if you look at just at plant cost, operating plant cost, it's 10 times more expensive than Eskom's coal cost.
Wow. See, that's the other piece that's left. And, it's interesting for all these people who can afford jets and private, flights to Scotland for the COP, or going to Paris, or going wherever, Rio, for these big conferences on these things, on the environment. I went to the Renewable Energy, American Renewable Energy Conference in Colorado a couple years ago in Aspen, which is a big ski resort. I went out there, and I flew out on a commercial flight to Denver, and then rented a car and drove out there. And I was there with Tom Stein, the billionaire American hedge fund guy who now is a green energy proponent and was running for president at the time. And that was in 2019, and before I retired. And I was a guest speaker out there talking about energy in Africa, on a panel out there. But there were dozens of incredibly uber wealthy people out there, almost all of them from the political left, and they're preaching about the horrors of the earth and stuff. And I'm looking at these people, and I walked around with some of them, and they're so completely disconnected from the world around them. They have no idea what's going on. And then when I left, I drove out of Aspen. And when I came in from the north, driving in, so I didn't go past the airport and turn to go into where the resort was to attend the conference. When I left, I decided to take a different route and go through the mountains, drive through Aspen, which took me past the airport. I am not embellishing in this number. There were at least 150 private jets sitting on the tarmac there from all these uber wealthy people who flew there and then had the audacity to preach to us that we're evil people because we want warmth, light, and comfort, and we want reliable work and jobs. It's unbelievable, the hypocrisy of these people who preach this stuff.
I can only echo that. I mean, and we've got the same thing here. We're sitting with energy impoverishment going on at the moment, because even our Eskom tariff is 4 times higher than what it should be and would have been if there hadn't been corruption. And so you find that most people, given that the energy prices, electricity prices have risen in the last 12 years by roughly between 500% and 700% above the inflation rate. I don't know about your part of the world. When I studied a little bit in North America, most people kept par with the inflation rate, and you really had to perform very well to get increases above the inflation rate. And that's the same here, and I assume it's the same economics around the world. So most people have now actually become impoverished because of the extremely high tariff increases at our utility. And in fact, there are people, whole households, having to either steal power illegitimately or go without power. In other words, go back to the bushes, so to speak, because they cannot afford power. And that is not the way to build a world economy, a growing economy, a burgeoning economy with economic growth, the share prices that increase, and all the rest. The key driver of more than 95%, and I've done a cursory desktop study, around about 95% of economic activity in this day and age is solely dependent on electrical power. And the cheaper the power, the higher the growth rates. The more expensive the power, the lower the growth rates. I mean, that correlation is pretty clear. And so in the first instance, we are already deprived of power because it's been corrupted and increased far above the inflation rate. Secondly, if we now go according to the COP direction and do away with all our cheap coal plants, I mean, is the world standing for more discrimination against our impoverished black people? Yeah. Is that the way we're going?
Absolutely. That's exactly my point. You know, when I was a young officer, and by the way, folks, you're listening to Chris White Africa on the Indaba Africa channel here on the Indaba Broadcasting Network. It's Sunday, the 21st of November. My special feature guest is Ted Blom. We're talking about energy in general, electricity generation in particular, and South Africa focus on. But absolutely, Ted, I'm with you 100%. When I went to the Gulf War as a young lieutenant in 1990, a lot of people whom I knew from university were writing to me and saying, this is all about just, oil. It's about oil. It's about oil. And I was young and idealistic, and I didn't see it that way. But I realized when I was there that even if it is about oil, so what? The world's economy, whether people like it or not in 1990, relied on the safe, reliable, and inexpensive delivery of petroleum around the globe. And until something that could replace that at the same kind of effectiveness, safe, reliable, and inexpensive, that's the reality. And when Saddam Hussein threatened, 1/3 of the world's oil supply by trying to, put pressure on Saudi Arabia and potentially captured after having captured 6% of the world's oil production in Kuwait, that forced George Herbert Walker Bush's hand. And so from a moral perspective, I said to myself, you know what? It's one. If I have to pay twice as much for gasoline, it's inconvenient and it's pressure and people in my family don't have much money. That's painful. But when we have to pay twice as much, what do we stop doing? We stop buying bananas from the Philippines. We stop buying cocoa from Ivory Coast. And who really suffers? The world's poorest people suffer, who are making commodities or living in countries that don't have the resources, and they have to pay the high price. Plus, we stop buying their goods and services, and they get hit with a double whammy. So for me, it was about energy. After I came to that realization, that epiphany on my own, I had no problem whatsoever thinking about what was going on there. It's about safe, reliable access. And you talk about, as the prices go up, economic activity goes down. I haven't bought anything this year other than, food and petrol and paying my utilities. I haven't bought clothing, a couple rugby jerseys, but I haven't traveled to a lot of places I normally go. I haven't gone to sporting events, not because I'm terrified of the Rona, because that's definitely not the case, but because, quite frankly, I'm paying twice as much for energy. Since President Trump left office in January, I'm paying double the price for petrol in the state that I live in. Which is still demonstrably lower than most of the world because we have far lower taxes. But it's because of this ineffective policy by the president and also the uncertainty in the markets because he's trying to shut down energy production and the impact of the words he's had. And people don't realize that energy is necessary. And you may not like it, but would you prefer that people are hungry, have no immunizations, have no pharmaceuticals, have no safe food supply? I mean, the alternative is not desirable, and that's what they're trying to foist on people.
No, that's exactly the point. It hurts my heart, and I struggle to understand the logic of the so-called liberal left, who, on the one hand, want to save the planet, but they're quite happy to desecrate the standard of living of the poor. At the end of the day, economics works that the bigger the market, the bigger the demand, the bigger the growth rate. So if we could get most people onto a decent standard of living and a decent level of consumption, that would open up massive markets. I mean, the African market hasn't actually even got near its potential. If we could add the demand, commercial demand of another 1.2, 1.3 billion people to the world economic demand, I think it would benefit firstly, most of the global corporations would benefit, and certainly mankind should certainly feel a bit more satisfied and complacent. I don't think anybody can live easily knowing. And I mean, it's been Princess Diana was the spokesperson for the poor and the trodden and so forth when she toured this continent and showed up the victims of landmines, the victims of war, and war and landmines and poverty, all are anathema to right-thinking people. And I would have thought that by helping people with access to cheap energy, one would be able to do yours part of mankind's service, and by the same time benefit yourself by having a bigger market. I can't understand the disjointed thinking that seems to be going on. It's something that maybe I'm just too old to understand the modern day economics.
No, the problem, Ted, is it's not about economics. It's not about right. It's not about efficacy. It's about politics and power. That's what this is all about. This whole narrative is about politics and power. You know, the polar bears and the ice caps and all that. I'm not denying things like they're happening, but it's misused, kind of like the current pandemic's being misused for political control and for enriching certain groups of people amongst the elites. It's really, really sad. And you're not wrong. So couple of things real quick from the conversation, the chat over here. So John Jarvis said he did get a quote to put solar panels on his house. He wanted to be self-sufficient for energy. He said his house was estimated 450,000 Rand. Well, I got you beat, John. I just inquired to find how much solar panels, but not exactly always sunny here in Philadelphia. I know that's a sitcom, but it is not exactly sunny here in central Pennsylvania all the time. And just to find out what they cost, it was 600,000 Rand or $40,000 to equip my house with panels and then have the ability to sell some of the electricity back into the grid. So, it's who can afford that? Certainly not most South Africans. I can't afford that. I mean, I suppose I could, but I'm too frugal to put that out there. So not going to happen. Not going to happen. Now, here's a question for Anna Marie Nell. She asked, and I'll answer it, and then Ted, let me get your thoughts on it. She said, "Is your guest aware whether South Africa is supplying power to Namibia while we have a shortage?" I don't know if that's the case, but there are long-term contracts that are in place which require power suppliers to provide power, and that's one reason why when they turned off power to Zimbabwe in around 2000 when they started farm invasions, it was easy to do because they weren't paying Cahora Bassa, and so Mozambique could shut it off because they weren't paying their bills. And I think Eskom, they weren't paying Eskom, so they could turn it off. But Botswana, at the same time, when South Africa needed more juice out of its grid, they couldn't turn that off because there was an agreement to sell them power. Eventually, I think that lapsed and they cut it back. But are you aware of whether in the Southern African power pool, if South Africa is generating electricity now and it's being shared with its neighbors?
Yes, the agreements between the different entities. So the agreements are between South Africa's Eskom and the National Power Company of Botswana, for instance, and similar for NamPower. They have different tiers of supply. So in terms of the pricing, they have a guaranteed supply agreement, and then they have options on top of that. So to the extent that the situation is that we have inconvenient load shedding on this side, but still able to supply, we have an obligation to satisfy those agreements at the base level. And then in terms of the optional extras, if we don't have surpluses here, we tend to cut back the surplus power allocations to those countries in the pool. But if we have a national blackout, of course, then we're not in a position to supply anybody, and then obviously that there will be no power generated and supplied to anybody.
Absolutely. So let me, before, I don't want to keep you here all day, but you've been very generous with your time. And before we wrap up, I'll ask you to come back on camera so we can see it, but not just yet. So I keep the audio going. I don't want to lose that. But before we wrap up here, I did want to ask you a question about the mining industry, which and industry in general in South Africa, which are big consumers of electricity. The impact of Eskom's woes over the past 15 years at least has definitely had an impact on industry. We saw the platinum mining industry almost shut down because there wasn't enough power, or trying to fight for power with Eskom and get it over consumers. What's what's the future here? It doesn't look very promising. It looks kind of bleak for the mining sector. You got gold mines use a lot of electricity. The platinum mines use a lot of electricity. You mentioned aluminum. Oof, that's a huge energy consumer, smelting aluminum from bauxite. All of this stuff doesn't augur well, from my viewpoint, for South Africa's economy and its economic growth. You can't grow your economy if you can't provide power to industry and the mining sector. And if you can't provide it to them, they can't generate jobs and they can't grow. It sounds like a cycle that is everything rests on each other and the whole thing comes tumbling down. Any thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. So, I mean, I cover energy in this part of the world, but I also cover mining, and I've actually had the privilege of lecturing in mining across the globe, including North America. And yes, mining and, of course, it's smelting together consume a massive amount of power. In fact, less now than it did in the 80s. Because we now have more households connected to the grid, and obviously they take a proportion of the power supply. But mining and manufacturing used to take about 70% of Eskom supply, and you require a very stable supply because you are sending people underground. When you send people underground, you need to be able to get them underground safely. They go down with electric hoists. And then secondly, you need to be able to ventilate them. Because there's no fresh air down there. And thirdly, you need to cool them because the ambient temperature underground is close to 40, 45, 46 degrees. So you need to be able to cool those people, otherwise they'll roast downstairs. And then when the product comes up, you need to smelt it. And you will know, and I think most people will know, that once you start the smelting process, you cannot interrupt it. It's like baking bread. Once you put the bread in the oven, it's got to stay there for the full period of time and come out cooked on the other side. If you switch it off halfway, it turns to be a flop or a disaster. And the same with smelting. If you stop the smelting halfway, the pots freeze. And it takes you up to 6 months to chip away and unfreeze the pots. And in the process, you can actually damage the insulation, in which case you have to throw the whole melting pot away. So it's critical. It's a critical supply element. And the reason why we haven't seen more mining activity and investment in this country over the last 20 years is twofold. One is the problem of sustainable, reliable, cheap energy. That's the one way. And the second one has been the nationalization of all our mineral rights by the government. They've nationalized the mineral rights. They've taken it away from farmers and landowners who used to be the owners of the minerals under the ground. And they said, we, the government, have grabbed that. Some of the mining houses put up a court case against that and buckled because of the political pressure. So you haven't seen proper exploration, and I guarantee you won't see proper exploration as long as that regime is in place, because there's no incentive for us to go and do exploration to give the minerals to the government. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no, it doesn't at all. In fact, and that's people talk about reasons for success, this, that, and the other. One of the things I argue, having lived all over the world, all over Africa, Europe, and not lived, but been many times to Southwest Asia. One of the problems is that most of the world has a system like South Africa has, where the government claims the mineral rights to the minerals, and some countries they claim the water rights too, for that which is under the land of the legitimate, lawful title deed owner to that land. Here in America, that's not the case. Now, you have a situation where people sometimes sell the mineral rights to their land and someone holds it. So when you sell the land, it doesn't come with the mineral rights. But that's because of a contractual obligation that's happened. But here, if you own the land, the water that flows across it, the minerals and resources underneath it are yours. You own them, and you have an incentive to exploit them in a fashion that's reasonable, so you don't just destroy your land. But when the government controls things and they take the mineral rights and just steal them from the people, they impoverish people. We'd have to look no further than the Niger Delta in Nigeria. The indigenous people of Biafra who are down there who want to break away, and those in the Niger Delta involved in oil bunkering and all these other things. The oil there doesn't belong to them. The money that accrues from the oil industry doesn't come back to the people who own the land or who occupy the land. And that's a serious problem. And we see the same thing in South Africa. Why in the world, if you own land, would you want the government to come in and dig it all up to mine coal or platinum when you're getting nothing out of it? You should profit and benefit from the fact that you were wise enough or smart enough to purchase that land and be a good steward of it. And it's really, really a backwards economic model. And in virtually every country where we see this, we see a lot of untapped capital that is dead capital because people won't exploit the minerals and resources.
Well, Chris, that's the first degree that you just described. The second degree is that if you want to exploit that, you then get hit by the BEE or affirmative action requirements. Yeah. And that's why Anglo-American and Billiton have divested of their coal interests in South Africa and eventually will divest of all the mining interests. Because if you want to then exploit those minerals, even though they now have been nationalized by the government, so you have to pay them the royalty. If you want to exploit those minerals, the entity that you use to do that needs to be 51% minority or majority owned by the Black Empowerment Partners. So you, as a public company, you will not be fulfilling your fiduciary duties to your shareholders by putting in your good money. The other party puts in no money. They have 51% control, and you fund the exercise. You cannot fund an exercise and not exercise control over the funding as a proper corporate citizen. So that's another reason why you won't see the mining industry prosper in this part of the world.
Well, and you see, for instance, very well-connected mining interests who finally just say the hell with it, and they either sell their interest to someone else, and we saw this massive merger between Anglo-American Gold and in Ghana, Ashanti Gold, forming that. That was a desperate move, I think. And then you see the Oppenheimers completely exit the diamond business. The Oppenheimers aren't part of De Beers. They sold their interest, and they're looking in Asia to invest their money because it's not profitable going forward because of all the stuff that's going on. In fact, you can't own things outright. It's very, very complicated. You know, in Botswana, Debswana, which is the joint venture between, of course, which you're well familiar with, is the joint venture between De Beers and the government of Botswana. It's supposed to be a 50-50 joint venture, but now the amount of revenue is already larger than 50% accrued to the government. Then on top of that, they get the fees and all these royalties and things. In the end, the De Beers portion of Debswana only gets about 13% of the profit that comes out of it. The rest accrues to the government of Botswana. So at some point you have to shake your head, why am I even bothering doing this? But anyway, it's pretty crazy what's going on there, Ted. Let me do this. Is there anything you'd like to share with people? Let's try to get your camera on. We'll try it. If it freezes up, then turn your camera off again, because we'll get you on for the last few minutes here, if that's all right.
Okay, yeah, I think one area that we need to perhaps just
Ted, by the way, I'm not in a hurry to chase you off. I just don't want to, be in, and have me overstay my guest being on here. So if you're able to stay longer, we can go, because the audience is really engaged and they're really learning a lot here.
Okay, but I think what we need to look at, we've talked about the negative side of Africa, but there are some opportunities as well. And I think we would be remiss if we don't at least allude to some of those opportunities.
Sure, please do.
We can try the camera, but
just leave it off for now, because it looks like we're going to go a bit longer. That's fine. And before you tell that story, let me just make it clear. So, while we talk about a lot of pessimistic things here, the reason when I left active service as a colonel from the Army, I started my consultancy, the Indaba Africa Group, wasn't for broadcasting, although that was going to be a side piece of it. It was to drive American businesses into Africa, because by 2050, Africa's population is going to be 2.3 to 2.5 billion people with a consumer class of 900 million. And that's cooked in. There's nothing anybody can do unless you run around and sterilize, 500 million people. That's going to happen. That's just going to happen because of demographics by 2050. If America doesn't get engaged, if we don't see Sprint and Xfinity and that's Italian now, but American brands and businesses doing business all over Africa, we are going to be a third-rate economic power, at least a second-rate. So I'm all about the positive aspects, the great opportunities coming in Africa. So I don't want Ted or my audience to get the impression that it's just all doom and gloom. And Ted's going to give us some more good news here. Go ahead, Ted.
Okay, so a very good friend of mine, and in fact the godfather of my children, he studied at university with me many years ago in the mid-70s, and he became a petrologist. And I really didn't understand what that meant, but having had the friendship going for the best part of 40 years, I've now seen that he's uncovered energy pockets right around the continent, starting with the Ibobesi gas pocket off the west of Cape Town. He discovered the Kudu deposit off Namibia, which it's been there for more than 30 years. It hasn't been exploited. It's got more than 1 TCF of gas. And you will know a TCF is a trillion cubic feet. Yep. And that is what you need as a minimum to make it viable. The problem at Namibia is the economy is not big enough to be able to absorb the amount of energy to make it viable, but they could certainly bring it up and ship it to South Africa. The interconnect in terms of the grid is already there. All we need is some politician with a little bit of vision and shallower pockets, and that could happen tomorrow. Then if we go right up to the DRC, the same guy discovered the inland DRC pockets. and the company that he worked for claimed those rights. They were confiscated by Mr. Kabila when he was still in power. Kabila Jr., you remember Kabila Sr. was murdered by allegedly Kabila Jr. And then he went up to Ghana, and he discovered the offshore gas pockets in Ghana. Again, a massive deposit, and that hasn't been properly developed. And as you will know, the whole of West Africa is energy starved. And we've got massive iron ore possibilities in Mauritania. There are billions. I mean, I think there's more than 4 billion tons of iron ore, and it's not just magnetite, it's magnetite and hematite. So it's both sorts of iron ore, and it's right at the coast, and it's on the surface. So it's easily mineable if it isn't for the ideological and religious issues pertaining in that part of the world. And then he went into Uganda, and under the lake in Uganda, he found a massive gas deposit. Again, that hasn't been properly exploited. And that would make a massive difference to the people of Uganda in terms of their energy requirements. Going over to the eastern side of Africa, he discovered massive pockets of Kenya. And that's the second part of the Middle East deposit. The Galwa deposit that everybody found in the Middle East actually extends down the coast of East Africa. And again, because of tribal warfare and tribal and nefarious fighting and stuff, that hasn't been exploited. If we come right down towards Tanzania, there may or may not be pockets there. There's certainly a lot of coal in Tanzania and Malawi. But then we've got the biggest gas find in the world, and the northern part of Mozambique, the Rovuma Basin, where they have found 200 TCFs of gas. 200 TCFs of gas. If my memory serves me correct, that's 20 times larger than the North Sea gas fields. And that will last Africa for at least 400 years, if not longer. And again, it's right offshore, it's in shallow waters, and it's easily exploitable. And that's where we saw ISIS come in the last 12 months to create instability. Again, that gas field has been known now for more than 8 to 9 years, and the government hasn't got off its behind to start developing that. And given the energy poverty we have in Africa, I mean, you put a proper entrepreneur in there, you put a Musk in there or something like that, and he will see that within 10 years that thing is developed and firing up all the cylinders of the economies of Africa.
No, absolutely. You know, and it's the thing is, it's politics. I mean, look at Chad. Chad is a country wrecked with conflict, endless conflict, government nearly being overrun. Debe's government, of course, he died recently in conflict with rebels, but his government was nearly collapsed years ago. But before that, because he's the dictator and controlled things, and they wanted to exploit the oil, which is not a lot of oil in Chad, but it's only 2 decades worth of exploitable reserves. They built a pipeline all the way to the coast, and they started exploiting Chad's oil. Because they had a party that was willing to work with them, in this case a dictator, unfortunately. But you look at the things you're talking about. In Uganda, the Albertine Basin, the Albertine Graben there is massive oil deposits, which could meet all of Uganda's energy needs for decades and have a little bit even for export at the peak of production over a period of about a decade. And it's still not in production. The Turko Basin in Kenya was explored after Uganda was, and it's already been in production for half a decade, producing oil for Kenya. It's absolutely crazy when politics intrudes, and then land tenure and rights and things like that. And you're talking about all these natural gas deposits off the coast. Ghana, which deregulated a lot of things in its economy, they discovered the Jubilee Field. You mentioned natural gas. Jubilee Field is there for petroleum, and it's been in production now for several years and accruing great benefits to Ghana. It's the politics of energy is really interesting, and it's you also got the curse, the natural resource curse that people want to talk about. But if you have good governance and honest people, and you have a free market approach, everyone can benefit from this, and some people can profit, if not most people. It's really sad to see all this untapped potential. You mentioned iron in Mauritania. There's also phosphates there. There's petroleum off the coast. There are many resources across Africa that are basically stuck in no production because of governance and or conflict. And it's really sad. Africa should be a powerhouse, but instead, much of the continent is greatly retarded in its development to this day.
No, that's exactly it. And I think somebody that's just starting to see that are the Chinese, and one can't blame them for wanting to extend their influence, and some of it has not been good, and I dare believe that. From a minority or from a weakling point of view, it will be seen as a recolonization of the African continent. But if people cannot get up and help themselves, so be it. I mean, that's just the rule of the jungle. That the strongest will survive and the strongest will dominate. And if we cannot pick ourselves up by our bootstraps, well, then we need to just shut up and go with the flow.
Yeah, no, absolutely crazy. Well, Ted, your predictions for the festive season in South Africa, perhaps not so festive as people's aircon will be shut off in the heat of summer and they'll be sweltering. Is my prediction off the money, or are we going to magically see electricity come back before Christmas?
Okay, so I think I went to a sermon at a church about 5 or 6 years ago, and the preacher said, you operate on your life on a surface. Let's assume the side of a book. And if you stay in the middle of that surface, you're reasonably safe. But if you start messing around the edges, then you mustn't cry if you fall off, because you are tempting fate. And that's where we are in South Africa. We are fishing around the edges, the perimeter of the power surface. And this energy situation could collapse at any one time because we are not doing what is healthy engineering management of the system. So I can't predict. All I can say is that for the next 5 years at least, and then my numbers are backed up by the CSIR, our Scientific Research Institute, is that there's a shortage of around about 8 gigawatts of power. And it's not that we need more installation. The installations are there. They just need to be woken up and serviced and run. So while we're under the current regime where they can't seem to get their act together and fix things up to make them run, we are on the precipice of collapse at any one stage. And come February next year, when Koeberg goes off with the retrofitment of those generators for a period of, they say, 6 months at a time for each of those generators. It could be longer because it's the first time it's happening in Africa. It's the first time in 40 years that they're lifting the cap of those nuclear domes. They might be shocked to find out what they see underneath. It's old technology. I don't know where you find people who are familiar with the old technology to come and take it apart and retrofit it. But nevertheless, I think I wouldn't be surprised if there are delays with that. And so it could be a rough ride over the next couple of years. But I believe that from next year, the private sector will make use of the 100 megawatt grant given by the government, and I don't see why the government is the owner of your and my power generation capability. But nevertheless, people want to be subservient to that type of nonsense. It's their own case. But I foresee more and more larger companies making up generating their own power and just forgetting about the government. And in fact, I think the further we go around the world, probably the more irrelevant government actions will become. The actions will be taken by the free market, and the free marketeers and the players in business will just do what's necessary. We cannot be stuck with antiquated ideological situations and mindsets. The world can't wait for that, and we can't put people in famine waiting for ideological progress. It's not the right thing to do.
No, I agree 100%. A quick question here. A lot of pressure has been brought to bear of late on the CEO of Eskom, Andre de Ruyter. And when he first came in, he started to sack some people who were accused of corruption and pilfering and theft and things like that. And of course, the tired old phrase came out, he's a racist. They went after him, never once in his life called a racist, and suddenly he's a racist. That, of course, was dispelled by Eskom itself in subsequent investigations. Incredible waste of time, kind of like the Russia collusion narrative, a waste of time, people cooking stuff up to cover their own malfeasance. So that went away. But now with the incessant load shedding and grid failures have been taking place in the past few months, there's been talk and calling in some sectors for him being sacked. I don't know that de Ruyter, he's had enough time to turn anything around. This is a long-term project, and some people say he's not the right guy. I don't know that he is or isn't, but do you think that the pressure will increase on Andre de Ruyter, and is he going to wind up being a sacrificial lamb politically at some point, just because it's convenient to sack the CEO and start over?
Yeah, I was one of the critics of the appointment of Mr. Director. I found a lot of his expressions very difficult to understand and believe. I don't believe he has the engineering competency to run an organization as complex as Eskom. He pretty much came in as a novice. He must have learned something in the last 18 months, but he made massive promises which he would never be able to deliver on. And also, I think he's being played by his puppet masters. He's cut the maintenance budget by nearly 75%, if I see the numbers correctly.
Wow.
And you can't, I mean, you've really got to be thick. Excuse my French. But you really got to be stupid to complain about broken and unmaintained plant and then cut the maintenance budget. I mean, I don't understand how those two things hang together. So I think it's just Eskom is another political play. The generation side has been run into the ground, as I said, to make space for the so-called government-linked renewable sector. And I don't think the people who are playing that game actually understand the game well enough to understand that you can't run this economy without storage or backup or dispatchable baseload power. They don't understand that. They don't care about understanding that. They're only greedily trying to sort out their own pockets. And unfortunately, if we run down the dispatchable baseload of Eskom, we will sink this economy. That's it. And I'm not sure Mr. Director is actually playing to the market. I think he's playing to his political masters.
Interesting analysis. Thank you for that. And I wasn't aware of your position ahead of time on that, so that was very interesting for me to learn that. There's two projects that one has been talked about for decades, is yet to come to fruition, and the other actually came to fruition rather quickly here, and it's created all kinds of political turmoil. The two projects I'm talking about are the Grand Inga Dam project, a series of dams on the Zaire River, or the Congo River, excuse me, not Zaire River, the Congo River in the DRC. That's been pitched and talked about for decades here. It could generate, X 100 gigawatts of power, yada, 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 yada. And then the other, and that's really gone nowhere. And then the other, of course, is the Grand Renaissance Electricity Development Project, GERD, in Ethiopia, which is creating all kinds of political issues between Ethiopia. Of course, Ethiopia has bigger fish to fry right now with the government about to be overrun by rebels from Tigray as they're on the gates of Addis at the moment, where I lived until a couple years ago, by the way. But that one's actually, Ethiopia put their muscle behind it. They made it happen. The dam is up. The reservoir has been filled. I think it's mostly filled at this stage. But it is a political football between Egypt, Sudan, especially Egypt and Ethiopia. But what about the Grand Inga project? Is that thing ever going to get off the ground? It seems implausible at this stage.
Well, that project made me eat humble pie. When I was pretty much a novice in the electrical energy industry in the 1980s, and having just come out of university at that time and done some time in the conscription in the army, I was asked to put together a supply and demand picture for Southern Africa. And one of the question marks was Grand Inga. And I totally because I'm not an engineer, I suppose, I totally misanticipated the requirements for that project. And I totally ignored the political implications of that project. I still worked on the old idea that to generate power at Grand Inga, you were going to have to build a dam wall across the river, which is a massive river, and would be engineering feat of its own, probably similar to the scale of the Three Gorges in China. Not that I've been to the Three Gorges of China, but I've read a little bit about it. And that was a faux pas on my side, because with current engineering, all you need to really do, and I'm going to make it sound simplistic because that's the type of person I am. I don't understand complex things. All you need to do is you need to go and drop some generators into the river, anchor them, and put the conductor onto them. It's actually a reasonably simple exercise from an engineering point of view. So all you're left with is the politics. And the problem is the politics of Africa and the poverty of Africa will probably preclude the Grand Inga scheme probably ever happening. If we were going to feed, and we've actually budgeted, as far as I know, in our government's budgets, for offtake from the Grand Inga, we've given some guarantees, not the majority guarantees, but some guarantees on offtake. But the fact of the matter is, for those lines to come from the Congo, across Angola, across Namibia or Botswana into our part of the grid, you're talking about a good 4,000 or 5,000 kilometers of conductor. Firstly, you have, of course, resistance on those lines. So the power that you put in on the one side won't be the power that you get out on the other side. You lose a fair percentage. And I think over that distance, you might lose as much as 20-30% of the power that goes into it. Grand Inga, on paper, has a capacity of about 80 gigawatts of power. 80 gigawatts would probably go a long way to electrifying the whole of Africa, certainly in the medium term, until it becomes properly industrialized. So, yes, I think from an engineering point of view, Grand Inga is very, very feasible and very, very doable, and can be done in a modular fashion. You don't have to build a massive wall across the river. But from a payment and political stability point of view, I know Britain had 2 copper concessions in the DRC, and they were ready to actually execute those. And they went to Mr. Kabila Jr. and said, "Okay, we're ready to go. Can you please now, switch on the power?" And he said, "No. If you want the power, you're going to have to generate the power yourself as well." And I heard it second hand or third hand that Britain walked away because if they had done the power and the 2 copper mines, their country exposure would have been far bigger than the appetite at that time. So they walked away from the 2 copper mines and the electricity generation project. So I think from an engineering point of view, it's very doable. It would be a fantastic project. I don't think it will ever happen.
That's pretty crazy. Now, by contrast, in Ethiopia, the Ethiopian government put the resources behind it, and they built GERD, and it's about to deliver electricity, which is very much needed in Ethiopia. Their supply has been insufficient and not necessarily reliable. That one, however, comes at a political cost. You got geopolitical concerns now between Egypt, which is terrified that they'll use the dam to shut off the flow of water to Egypt. But I think that's, in my view, a little overblown. You'd have to flood whole sections of Ethiopia and put a lot of pressure on that dam if you're going to cut the entire Nile off, or maybe enough of it that would affect the flow.
Look, I mean, I think while the dam's filling up, there would be sort of impediments to the flow rate from time to time. But I mean, normally, adult people would get around the table and sort out some sort of agreement, because the generation of power there and having reserve water, especially in this arena of climate change, it certainly must have more benefits than it has issues around the table. We talked about carbon dioxide earlier on. I just want to go back to that, if I may, for 10 seconds. Yeah. Let me not for one stage ignore climate change. This climate on this earth has changed 100 million times in the billions of years that it's been around. No man has the power to stop climate change of whatever sort, whether it's hotter or colder or whatever. This whole climate change argument, you will recall, started with global warming until it was found out that the statistics that they were using were wrong, and we're actually on a cooling cycle at the moment. But nevertheless, let's go and park that in the political domain. I don't want to talk about that nonsense. But as far as the dam is concerned, I think the parties that are involved there must just be responsible. And you know what? If we can't get some sort of ideological commonality amongst us, that what we do has got to be good for the continent, it's got to be good for everybody. And once we get it, we must drop our egos and do what's right. If we can't get to that sort of level of common sense, then there's not much hope for this continent. And I pray that those parties that are involved will sit down like mature adults and just find a way forward, and that will benefit everybody in terms of water and power availability.
Interesting point there, Ted. We could take this conversation on for hours. You're very well informed, and I'd like to say that I'm better informed than the average person who's not involved in the industry. I think it's been a fascinating conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and I don't want to end it, but again, you've probably got some things to do here at some point. So before we do wrap up, let me ask this question. Any final thoughts you'd like to leave people with about either the situation in South Africa or energy in general, a message of hope, a message of impending doom, and anything you'd just like to share? I'll give you a moment to give give your final thoughts here. And before we do that, you're welcome back on the program at any time. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you feel you were treated fairly, and we didn't delve into any topics that we didn't discuss beforehand. This was a great conversation from my perspective.
Well, from my side, it's been an honor being on your program, and I'm deeply humbled that that my name has actually reached your shores. Certainly, look, one must be very careful. It's very easy to fall into despondency and doom and gloom. The fact of the matter is our predecessors overcame far bigger hurdles over the centuries that mankind's been around. And these political ideologues, they don't last forever. They tend to be the cause of their own demise. So people must just prevail, do the right thing, and eventually, as they say, we will overcome. I think that you only allow obstacles to be there because you don't have the perseverance or the guts to take them on. I've certainly been a little bit outspoken in this part, especially after I uncovered the corruption. My upbringing has always been that you talk the talk and you walk the walk, and there is no space for corruption and skullduggery. You serve the nation to the best of your ability, and you try and move everybody forward. And I certainly see any impediments that on our road forward. Yeah, I see them only as temporary obstacles. I think that eventually they'll be washed aside, and we will persevere with progress.
Well, that's a fantastic statement. I agree with you. These ideologues do come and go. Hopefully, we can get them off the stage before too much damage is done to the world. But they do come and go. You look at it vacillates the history of mankind, good times and bad times, owing to ideologues and political fanatics out there. So we're dealing with that. But Ted Blom, it's been a distinct pleasure to have you on the program. And again, the invitation's open. You're welcome to come back. We'll certainly never run out of things to talk about, at least energy in Africa and certainly in South Africa as we go forward. But I do want to wish you an early festive season, a happy holiday, and a Merry Christmas. Frohe Weihnachten, as we say in German. And you say, is it Kesfies in Afrikaans, I think it is. Kefes. How do you pronounce that?
Thank you very much, and same to you and your family and the rest of the listeners. Thank you very much.
Likewise. With that, I'll just go ahead and put you in the waiting room and let you drop off, and I'll close out the stream for the listeners and the viewers. Thank you very much, Ted Blom. Excellent.
Thank you.
All right, folks, that was Ted Blom. That was, I think, awesome. I don't know what your thoughts on that. I don't mean I want to sound like a fanboy there, but that was fantastic. It was a pleasure having Ted on. We had to overcome, data issue there because his connection was not very good, so we had to turn the camera off. So the first 10 minutes or so were very frustrating, but after that, he switched to his mobile. We turned the camera off, and we could hear him the rest of the way. So thank you all so much. Be sure to smash the like button, folks. It costs you nothing. I mean, just a moment of your time, absolutely nothing. By the way, folks, I've discovered something new, which I'll share privately with the moderators about what YouTube is doing and why numbers are looking low. I finally figured something out in the course of this stream that I've been observing now for some time. So anyway, Laura Salas says, great chat, intense. Yeah, and my thanks. Can I disclose the person who helped point me in the direction of him? I don't do that because I want to keep the person's identity secret. But there was a member of our audience who asked me to get Ted on. And I think Ted was a bit nervous about coming on because the things we're talking about can be taken very political. And he doesn't have a political dog in the fight. He's just talking about the provision and delivery of electricity and energy for Africa and for South Africans in particular. But I think we had a good conversation here in which although I made some political comments, that's my prerogative. It is my program. But it was nothing particularly mean or malicious, just in order to frame things. So, yep. What else we got here in the chat? Rick asked a question about, I didn't see this, Ograbi's Valley, damn. Good question there. Sorry, I missed it. And then Kevin, what is the death sentence? She said she has a death sentence. I didn't catch what Debbie Ellis was saying there. Did they damage something and now she has her clock is running out? I didn't get what Debbie Ellis was saying because the connection was bad there. Bradley Murray, good to see you again. Marilyn Brokenshaw, thank you for a very informative interview. You're welcome, and thank Ted very much for it. Steve Everett Sack of Cock Juju was also in the stream. 1 thumbs down. I don't know if it was Juju. Yeah, I mean, listen, folks, how sad and demented is that people have to come into this stream in which it's an informative stream. It's not about supporting a political party. It's not about supporting, a racial narrative. It's not about supporting a sporting team. It's about helping people know and understand why electricity is a problem in Africa and in South Africa in particular. And someone dislikes that? I mean, come on, that's just sad and pathetic. You hear the beginning, he was tense and slowly warmed up, and he was loving it by the end. He'll definitely come back. No, Paulie, and look, I mean, I'm not going to, let me pat myself on the back here. I mean, you can agree or disagree with me. Tell me, Paulie. I think my approach, that's why it's called the Indaba Conversation with Chris. We've had people come on the program before who are very, hard for one opinion or one guest, like, hey, shut up. I don't want to hear you. I want to hear the guest. Well, it's not about that. You guys remember that. We had some people, I call them trolls because it's my show. And my show is about having a conversation with people who are informed and switched on about things, whether it's Afrikaans music or it's the macadamia nut industry. But that doesn't mean that I'm not an informed journalist and I'm not an informed political science and historian. I can jump in these conversations. And that's kind of the approach I take in it. So, yeah, I'd like to think that he was tense at the beginning and became much more comfortable. And a lot of my guests are like that. Citizen Guardian was here earlier. Are you still here, Citizen Guardian? Boy, you should. If you could have put an egg between his bum cheeks, the egg would have been obliterated when he first came on the program. I could tell he was incredibly tense. He had not done it before. And so, not to call out Citizen Guardian, but just give an example. And he was very comfortable. And by the time we got the thing going, I don't attack my guests. There's no merit to that. But I do ask hard questions just in a professional manner. So, yeah, no, him or me or both of us. Was great, easy for us simpletons. Well, that's the other thing too, Paulie, is I like to think that when it comes to these highly tactical subjects and these deeply involved subjects, that I bring something that I kind of serve as a translator, not from language, not from English to Afrikaans or English to German, although I can do that, but also as someone that takes this topic that sometimes can be complicated for all of us to understand and interview a guest, and either the guest brings it down based on my questions or I bring it down to, not down, but bring it across, I should say, bring it across as a way that the layperson can understand so we can all benefit from it. Yeah, Paulie says he learned loads. Yeah, it was very, very interesting here. Leah Koeberg's back. Wow, good to see you again. Especially when the guests realize how knowledgeable you are in things in Africa. Yeah, I think that's part of it too. Good point. A number of South African guests either assume that I'm South African and don't want to come on because of a dog in the fight, or they think I have a dog in the fight, or they find I'm American. Like, I'm going to talk to this guy. What does he know about Africa? Yeah. Yeah, I do. YouTube will remove the dislikes. Now, I don't care. People put them on there. I don't mind the dislikes, although I'm baffled by this one person that's got an erection just to give me a dislike every time. I don't know what their issue is. There is a direct link. It's a valid discussion. Hey, Tony. Yep. Oh, she has cancer. I didn't hear that, Kevin. Did she share what type of cancer she has? Oh, my goodness. Wow. Yeah, Erica says it's takes a lot to be interviewed. It's nerve-wracking, but Chris is an excellent host. Well, thank you for that, Erica. I did interview you and geez, they're on a blank right now. Earlier, he hasn't been in the program in ages. Nigel Soden, who's also grew up in the DRC. It's a tough subject for those to understand when not fully understood. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, no, Kevin, I'm not ending the stream yet because I want to hear from Kevin. I'll go a couple more minutes here if she mentioned what type of cancer it is, because, I mean, different cancers have higher survival rates. And so when she says death sentence, I know it's a very emotional situation for her. I'm hoping that it's not maybe actually a death sentence, and maybe it's something that can be treated. If she shared that. Again, the connection was really bad this morning. Actually, by the way, for the trolls that don't like me, watch this morning's stream because it'll be the longest time you've ever heard a Chris White Africa broadcast without me talking incessantly. I didn't say anything for a whole long stretch of time there. I just let the guests speak who were talking at the Black Monday celebration or commemoration, I should say. Oh my goodness, that was something else. Yeah. Oh, by the way, I'll share in the moderators group what I think is going on here with the platform and what it's doing to folks. But anyway, listen, really awesome audience here. It's getting a bit late, so I'll debate about doing a night house today. I'll think about it, but I'm not certain I'm going to do it. I might go out and try to get the mold off the side of my house. It was sunny, but it looks like it's gotten cloudy, although my blinds are closed. Keep the sun out here, so I really can't tell. Vutsarker's off to Ronaldo. Yeah, he's back after a hiatus. His brother got married this week, so all the best to Debbie Els. Yep. Anyway, yes, all the best to Debbie L. Sorry to hear about the cancer. Louise says, your streams are always great and informative. Well, thank you so much for that. I wish millions more people would see them rather than just, watching stupid pet tricks. But you know what? We can do stupid pet tricks on this stream too. We can. You ready? All right, folks. Those going over Ronaldo, let me give you a preview. If you go over there and do a stripper chat, this will be what Ronaldo does. So Ronaldo will be doing a stripper chat for you. If you go over to Ronaldo, check it out. Here's Ronaldo, recorded this week in the Western Cape. He wasn't in Port Elizabeth. He went for a wedding there. This is Ronaldo doing a stripper chat on YouTube. I got this video. It's exclusive from Ronaldo. You ready? Oh, yeah. Come on, Renewable. Make it happen, man. Stripper chat. Baby, make it happen. Oh, yeah. Renewable. Make it happen, brother. Look at that. Look at that stripper chat. Oh, yeah. Get it on. Get it on. Go on, Renewable. Folks, anyway, a lighthearted moment after that long conversation. My thanks once again to my special feature guest, Ted Blom. Fantastic guest. Really enjoy. Here comes the kitty. Yep. I love that one. Anyway, folks, thanks a lot. Big audience. If anyone want to go over there, Ronaldo, feel free to go over and check out Ronaldo Jos on his program. He's got the tech chat going on here he just started a minute ago. Should be. So go check it out. Let me see if he's actually on or if he's delayed, because Ronaldo sometimes a little tardy. So... nope, Ronaldo hasn't started yet. Maybe he's waiting for me to end. Is Ronaldo here? There's 34 people over there, so I'm going to let you guys go. Chris, the night off, we pay him little enough. Yeah, thank you, Emery. I got a bunch of news. There's a lot of news to talk about, but maybe I'll make a short video and just do the headlines and post it rather than do a stream. But thank you all so much. Check out my content. Let's see, I put a few things up. We had the Black Monday live stream this morning. We got about 500 views on that now. We didn't have that earlier, so a lot of people tuned in after the fact. That's crazy. That's good, but we only had like 120 people during the stream. So 165. So about half the audience has come after the fact. That's good. A lot of people looking it up. Other videos. By the way, the Christmas video, the Kevin Nixon, thank you so much for that. I don't know if you're here. Kevin took clips from last year's Christmas special for the kids on the 23rd of December, put them all together, put some like little holiday stuff around him. It's a really nice compilation. It's an 11-minute video. It's on there. It's Chris Wyatt, Christmas 2021 invite. So check it out. Okay, show us the stripper cat again. Okay, here you go. One more time. All right, Ronaldo, make it happen, brother. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Like it's your last show, yeah.
Yeah. Tell him play another song. I'll try to slip 100 in your thumb.
Don't forget to super chat Ronaldo for his stripper chats over there on YouTube. All right. Okay. All right, thank you, Kevin. Thank you. All right, appreciate it. All right, yep, so Ronaldo is just waiting to go live. I'm going to end right here. Vutsarko's already over there saying, hey, yeah, if you go over to Ronaldo and say, Chris sent me, pay it forward. Appreciate it. Go tell Ronaldo I sent you over and tell him you missed him. We missed you, Ronaldo. You've been gone all week, man. You've been gone all week. All right, that's it. Don't forget to smash the like button, folks. 122 likes, 70 of you here. I know some of you haven't paid the price of admission. It's free. I know you're paying for your data, or maybe you're not, depending where you're at. But, hey, just smash the button. It's right down there. It's not hard. It doesn't take much effort. Smash that button. 122 likes, and that's it. Okay, cheers, folks. Catch you later. And check out my TikTok account, too. I did another video on TikTok last night. This one's about Canalan and the mayor. Yet ANC has discovered that the mayor was convicted of child rape after they went in coalition with him. Oh, by the way, the deputy mayor now was fired as a teacher for sexual misconduct. Canalan, you people deserve the crappy governance you get. That's what you get in Canalan. What a bunch of losers. All right, folks, cheers. Catch you all later. I'll see you on Ronaldo.